I had gotten everybody off to work. That's why most of the family was safe already, because Henry had left for work, and John and Clarence, Charles, Florence, Mary, they had all gone on to work. And I went back into the kitchen, clean up the breakfast things, and there was smoke up at the ceiling and getting thicker and coming lower. It must have started in the flue. That's the only thing that I can think. I pivoted around on my heel and ran to the back door and nearly fell on top of my cat, who has not been seen since. And I was yelling, "Fire! Fire!" Annie Shepherd and Mrs. Ruthenberg both heard me, and the way my throat feels, the volume I was yelling, I wouldn't be surprised maybe some of those folks up there in Fairview didn't hear me. But they came running. They ran over to the Advent Christian Church there and rang the bell, which is our fire signal. Mrs. Ruthenberg headed back to the reel shed that's built there at the back. She had that open, and those ladies had that reel cart dragged down plumb in front of our house by the time the men got there. So there was no time lost in getting to fighting that fire. Some young reporter from the newspaper came down, writing in his notebook, and he says, "By the time the firemen got there, the flames were dancing merrily about the roof of the structure." I'm glad someone found it merry. I hope that I don't leave anybody out of this list, but our firemen, Mr. Lusby and Mr. Loon and Mr. Blizzard and Mr. Deming and Mr. Wathen, Mr. Pennington, Fire Chief Edmondson, of course, and Mr. Collar were all here and helping to pump the water and get that fire under control. And Reverend Sweeney, he lives just in back of us. He was right here. We don't even go to that church. He's the most wonderful neighbor. Reverend Dale was here. Reverend Sutherland must have been busy. When we first moved out here to Silver Grove, we didn't even have fire protection or a fire department of any kind. The town council passed an ordinance that all property holders were to have a stout bucket and a ladder not less than 16 feet long. Now that was if somebody was on the second floor, we could still rescue them. Most of the people out here are like my husband and me, and kind of poor working folks, so you don't find too many two-story houses out here, but we could have rescued someone if we had to. They were thinking about putting in some bells on 20-foot tall poles that people could ring to get some help. But the New Albany Water Works decided to expand their service and improve their lines. When they did that, they ran those lines all the way out here to Silver Grove. And we organized the Silver Grove Volunteer Fire Department, and Mr. Edmondson was elected as the first fire chief. This was their first fire that the Volunteer Fire Department has had to answer. Well, that's a distinction I never wanted, but they were wonderful, and we bought 2 reel carts and 500 feet of hose on each cart, and they put in the fire plugs at that time. The main intersections in town, there's one at Oak and Indiana Avenue, and that's the part of Indiana Avenue that used to be Martha Turner Avenue. Then there's one at Shelby in Indiana and one at McLean in Indiana. So there's no part of Silver Grove that between those fire plugs and the hoses, we have good fire coverage. And they hooked up one of those 500-foot hoses and turned on the water, and the men were pumping. They maintained a jet of water 75 feet high. Now, of course, we don't need that kind of height, but that much water and that much water pressure, that's what saved our house this morning. I'm sure of it, because they were able to put a lot of water on it very quickly. I feel so blessed and so grateful. When we came out here, it was September of 1885, and we decided that we would come here to Silver Grove. Mr. McDonald had the lot. We bought that. It was $200 just for the lot, and then we had to build a house. And there were times that we wondered if maybe we had been a little too ambitious about what we were about, but we were able to build a house, and of course our family has been here, and the children, and it has been such a good home for us, and a good community to live in, good neighbors, as today when they turned out, and we have to rejoice in things like that and be mindful, because it was just September of 1889 that our little Henry took sick, and he was only 3 years old, and he died. So you have to be grateful for what you have. And it was not maybe 6 months later that we awoke on one fine Sunday morning to hear somebody in the house, and a burglar had gotten in. We found him ransacking a wardrobe. He got $16.50, an entire paycheck, plus some other odds and ends of valuables that he was able to stuff into his pockets. I think the thing that I regret the most, though, we had a lounge that was right by the window, and you could sit out that window, and that was where he chose to make his escape. And those boots on that lounge destroyed the upholstery on it, pulled out the stuffings in it. It was trash. There was nothing we could do. But it was a thing. And in 1894, our little Emma Helena got the croup and joined her brother. John, our oldest son, 1897, he decided to join the Army, signed up. They sent him down to Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and he got typhoid fever. Henry and I were really, really worried about him. We went down there to take care of him ourselves. Took Delia with us, and she invited her friend Emma Eads to go along. We got John well enough that he was able to come home and recuperated, and he went back then to the Army. It wasn't a year later, Miss Cordelia married an Army man. He got sent out to Fort Meade, and she was going to stay with us for the 3 years that he would be gone. But it wasn't a year later they got divorced. It was after that, though, that she met Mr. Alonzo Davis, and they've been married now for a few years, and they seem very happy, and that's another thing to be grateful for. And I certainly don't mean to suggest that we're the only ones who have difficulties or problems. Here we have had some epidemics in Silver Grove. We've had outbreaks of smallpox, which has scared everybody. And some other illnesses that we've had, blocks that had to be quarantined, and people staying in their homes. One time one of the preachers was quarantined. And everybody in the flock was sick and needed ministering to, but he couldn't leave his house. And things like that you have to contend with. And that's, Reverend Sweeney is just such a nice young man, and such a welcome addition here. He's glad to be here and just friendly and neighborly with all of us. The old preacher lives right, Reverend Sweeney lives right in back of us. The old preacher lives right across the street from us. And we've been friends for years, but he's kind of an interesting fellow. Up and left his wife twice. Now he's back. I don't say anything. They seem to have worked it out. And John, just this past January, maybe about not 4 or 5 months now, he works now down at the car works in Jeffersonville. He fell out of a second-story window. They brought him home, and I did not know if he would ever get out of bed again. He was so hurt. But he's back at work now. He is much better, and just a little bit ago he was able to get back to work, and so much to be thankful for. And I think if I could just find my cat, I would be completely content and satisfied. But poor little thing, she's probably halfway to Harrison County by now. I've been calling her all day. But I do hope that you will come and join us in Silver Grove. It's a good place to live.
Thank you, Mrs. Kahl. Has anybody seen the cat? Anybody?